July 2011. The heavy humid air enveloped the Green Hills area south of Nashville, Tennessee. The light from investigator Alicia Ward's flashlight pierced through the thick layer of dust covering the old concrete basement of St. Brigid's Chapel, a church abandoned since 1998. "Center, I need the forensics team here right away and prepare an exhumation order," she said over the walkie-talkie. Her voice calm but firm. The sound echoed between the damp brick walls, mingling with the wind whistling through the broken window frames. What started as a routine survey by the Tennessee Cold Case Unit had now become a discovery that could change the entire investigative history of Nashville. On the GPR scanner screen, the blue wave bands suddenly revealed an unusual depression, an empty cavity deep beneath the church floor, right under the pulpit where thousands of people had once knelt in prayer. "There's something here," a technician whispered. Ward approached, bending down to examine the discolored concrete surface. A long crack ran from the corner of the wall to the middle of the floor, old but distinct. She placed her hand on the icy cold stone floor, taking a deep breath. Everything her team had found in the 1970 file, the broken guitar string, the red soil sample, and Lieutenant Harold Moore's note, "Check the church basement if the opportunity arises," suddenly came alive. After more than 40 years, that opportunity had finally arrived. As the first drill bit pierced through the concrete layer, the smell of damp earth and rust filled the air. The metal detector emitted a long beep. "We have a signal," the technician reported. Ward looked at her watch, 2:47 a.m. In the thick darkness of the forgotten church, Nashville was about to confront a secret buried for 4 decades. What made this case particularly shocking was not just the discovery under the concrete slab, but the name of the missing person tied to this place. Danny Keaton, the singer-songwriter, once considered the young soul of the Music City. In 1970, Keaton left RCA Studio B with an unfinished track. That night, he disappeared. No body, no clues. Over 4 decades, Nashville changed, but Keaton's disappearance remained an unhealed wound. People erected statues, held memorials, sang his songs again, but no one really knew what had happened. Until Alicia Ward reopened the old file and followed every small detail, red soil traces, financial statements, and a photo of the forgotten church. Everything began to piece together like a cut-off song. And when she discovered this cavity, all suspicions converged on a name familiar to every local resident, Pastor Caleb Hart, who had preached for over 4 decades right on that ground. Before continuing this shocking story, please subscribe and like the video, because the discovery at St. Brigid's is not just the solution to an artist's disappearance. It is the first domino in a chain of events exposing buried secrets in the heart of a community that seemed pure. Because, when authorities finally carried out the arrest in 2011, the suspect was not some nameless person or some vagrant. It was someone Nashville trusted, someone they listened to preach every week, and someone who had walked on the concrete burying the past for 41 years. The Keaton case is not just a story about a disappearance being closed. It is a symbol of perseverance, of investigators who refuse to let justice be forgotten, and of forensic science advances that brought the voice back to someone once forced to be silent. This is the story of faith, betrayal, and justice delayed but never denied. The summer night of 1970 descended on Nashville with an air thick with heat and the smell of cigarette smoke mixed with guitar sounds echoing from the bars along Music Row. A short rain had just passed, leaving the road surfaces soaked, neon lights reflecting in smeared streaks on the asphalt. In RCA Studio B, the last tape reel stopped turning, the clock hands pointing to nearly 10 o'clock at night. Danny Keaton, the voice called the soul of Nashville, removed his headphones, forcing a smile at the technician. "I need some air, we'll record this one again tomorrow," he said. His voice hoarse from singing for hours on end. He gathered a few sheets of lyric notes, stuffed them into his jacket pocket, then left the studio, carrying the unfinished recording. His silver Chevrolet Impala turned out of the parking lot, merging into the sparsely populated road leading to the quiet Green Hills neighborhood. In that residential area, the night sank into the damp earth smell and rotting leaves. Around near midnight, the neighbor across from Keaton's house recounted hearing an argument echoing out, a man's low voice mixed with a woman's higher one, tense like a string about to snap. A loud crash, then the door slammed shut. After that, the house fell into silence. The porch light remained on, casting yellow light through the drizzling rain. No one saw Danny leave the house, nor was there any car passing the small road leading out to Franklin Pike Boulevard. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The first daylight shone through the window, illuminating the messy living room, a cold coffee cup, an unfinished sheet music lying on the table, a guitar left forgotten on the chair. Evelyn, his wife, came downstairs, calling her husband's name loudly, then stopped when only the creaking ceiling fan answered. She looked out to the garage. Empty. A feeling of panic rose in her throat. Evelyn picked up the phone, calling Danny's stepdaughter, Ruth. "Your father hasn't been back since last night," she said, her voice trembling. Ruth drove over, looking around the empty house and the chair where her father still sat every morning. There was no sign he had left voluntarily. After a few minutes of silence, Evelyn reached for the phone to dial the Davidson County Police Department's emergency number. When the dispatcher picked up, she said quickly, her voice choked, "Please, my husband Danny Keaton, he's missing. He didn't come home last night. I'm afraid something happened." At the other end of the line, the on-duty officer asked again, "You said he went missing from last night?" Evelyn gripped the receiver tightly, replying softly, "Yes, it's been more than 10 hours. Please send someone to help." At the other end of the line, the on-duty officer asked again to confirm the information, then promised to send someone right away. The call ended. The house fell into silence, only the slow ticking of the clock on the wall remaining. About 40 minutes later, 2 patrol officers from the Davidson County Police Department arrived. The patrol car lights reflected on the rain-soaked road surface after the night's rain, blue and red lights flashing through the windows. One of the 2, Officer Charles Dempsey, knocked lightly on the wooden door frame. Evelyn opened the door, her face pale, hair disheveled and stuck to her forehead. She said, trembling, "He's never gone overnight without calling me." Inside, Ruth and Tom, Danny's 2 stepchildren, had also just arrived. Their faces tense, eyes still sleepy, but gazes hardened by fear. The living room remained exactly as it was the night before, the cold coffee cup. The guitar leaning against the chair, handwritten sheet music scattered on the table. Dempsey opened his notebook, asking slowly, "She's in Saul." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Around 10 o'clock at night, we had an argument. He said he needed to get some air. Then he left. I thought he would come back. Did he walk or drive? I'm not sure. When I came downstairs, the car was no longer in the garage." Ruth interjected, her voice sharp. "My father would never just leave in the middle of the night. If he didn't come back, something must have happened." The officers quietly took notes, then split up to check around the house. The backyard garden was damp, fresh mud prints stamped on the path next to the fence. Dempsey bent down, shining his flashlight, but the shoe prints were smeared, not clear enough to identify. In the front, Lieutenant Harold Moore, the investigation team leader, had just arrived. He was tall and sturdy, with a sun-tanned face from years of handling missing persons cases around Davidson County. He stepped in, quickly observing the room, his eyes stopping at the chair by the window, where there was a small water stain like a raindrop had just fallen. "No windows are open," he said softly. "So where did this water come from?" Moore asked Evelyn to describe the previous night in detail. She recounted almost verbatim what she had said over the phone. The argument, the door slamming, then silence. No one else was in the house. Moore asked further, "Did he say he was meeting anyone? Possibly Father Caleb, the pastor at St. Brigid, is he often?" "He often went there when he wanted peace." Moore noted the name, underlining it with red pen. By near noon, the police completed the initial report. Victim Daniel Keaton, male 38 years old, missing since the night of July 11, 1970. Personal vehicle location undetermined. The report was sent back to headquarters. Moore requested the house be temporarily sealed off, while mobilizing patrol teams to sweep the route from Green Hills to St. Brigid's Chapel. That afternoon, Moore returned to the Keaton house to cross-check statements from the two stepchildren. Ruth said, "My father had no reason to leave. He had just signed a new tour contract and told me to come to the studio this morning." Tom, who was usually quiet, only added, "If he drove, someone must have seen him on the way." The statement made Moore pause. He quickly noted in his book, "possibly ambushed." As dusk fell, headlights from police cars shone on the porch. Moore leaned against the car hood, looking at the quiet house, rain starting to drizzle again. He said to Dempsey, "There are no signs he left voluntarily. No note, no luggage, no bank transfers. If it was an ordinary disappearance, there should have been clues by now." Dempsey nodded, adding the last line to the preliminary report. When the clock struck 8 p.m., the internal police bulletin was transmitted back to headquarters. Missing person case. Daniel Keaton, classified as suspicious disappearance. A special investigation team will be formed tomorrow morning. Outside, a new rain began to fall heavily. The flashing lights from the patrol car reflected on the windows, dyeing the absent singer's house in cold streaks of color. Early the next morning, when the first daylight was still caught in the mist, Lieutenant Harold Moore, along with two officers, Dempsey and Walsh, returned to the Green Hills area to conduct a detailed investigation. They started by knocking on doors along Maple Drive Street. Most neighbors said that night it rained heavily. They didn't hear anything, but a few recounted differently. Mrs. Helen Parker, living across from the Keaton house, affirmed around near midnight, "I clearly heard an argument. A man's low voice and a woman's shrill voice. Then there was a sound of something falling, like metal hitting the floor. Then silence. I thought it was just a marital spat I didn't expect." She shook her head at that point. Her statement was recorded, marked as key witness, audio event confirmed. Moore reconstructed the house diagram. Light points, window positions, sound directions. He requested the technical team to remeasure sound echoes. Cross-checking the time, Evelyn stated, around 10:15, which matched perfectly. At the same time, patrol teams were ordered to expand the search radius within half a mile around the Keaton house. They divided into three groups, one group following the dirt road toward Franklin Pike Boulevard. Near noon, Officer Walsh's group stopped by the roadside of a small road, where grass grew thick, rainwater pooling into puddles. He bent down, using gloves to pick up something heavy with water, a dark brown cowboy hat, and inside the brim was embroidered, DK in white thread. The hat was completely wet, stuck with mud, lying mixed among the rotting leaves. Walsh signaled the crime scene photographer to take photos, then put the evidence into a sealed bag. A few steps away, another officer discovered a broken guitar string piece, bent and twisted, stuck with red mud. When picked up, the mud fell off to reveal the shiny dull metal strand. Moore was present at the scene, kneeling down to observe the two pieces of evidence. "Hat and guitar string, no coincidence," he said softly. Danny Keaton was famous for always wearing this hat when going out, and using a special guitar string type he ordered custom from a company in California. Moore ordered, "Seal both, send to the forensics lab, record the exact location on the map." On the ground where the evidence was found, the officers noticed the strange soil color, deep red, sticky, and with a faint metallic smell. A local officer affirmed this soil type wasn't in the Green Hills area, but commonly found in the southern outskirts, near the old clay hills by St. Brigid's Church. Hearing that, Moore looked down at his own shoe sole, then at the mud-stained shoe prints on the road. "Take a sample of this soil back to the lab," he said. "We may have traced his direction." That afternoon, the K-9 unit of the police department was dispatched. The German Shepherd working dog named Duke was assigned to scent from Danny's jacket, which Evelyn had handed over. They released Duke in the Keaton backyard, It sniffed around the porch, then bolted toward the small road. Moore and Dempsey followed, the drizzling rain making the air thick with earth smell. Duke led them about 400 meters, crossing a leaf-covered path, then stopped in front of an old wooden fence leading into the St. Brigid's chapel area. It barked continuously, turning its head to look at its handler, then sniffed around the gate. Moore signaled to stop. He stood still for a few seconds, listening to the distant church bells ringing, heavy tolls in the damp space. "This is the third time this church's name has come up," he said quietly, to Dempsey. The victim's wife mentioned it. Now the dog stopped here too. Dempsey marked the coordinates on the map, circling the area with red pen, St. Brigid set, area of interest. When they returned, it was already late afternoon. In the temporary meeting room at Green Hills headquarters, Moore spread out the newly taken Polaroid photos on the table, the wet cowboy hat, the broken guitar string piece, the map of the route where the dog stopped. He lit a cigarette, tapping his finger lightly on the hat photo. If he didn't leave voluntarily, then this is where the trail ends. From the house to here is only half a mile. Someone was waiting. The first 48-hour report was sent to Davidson County Police Department headquarters on the evening of July 13th. Evidence collected: one cowboy hat embroidered DK, one broken guitar string, red soil sample not belonging to Green Hills area. K9 Discovery stopped in area near St. Brigid's Chapel, about 500 m from victim's house. Initial assessment: church area considered first point of suspicion, recommend expanding search radius 1 mile around the area. When the report was signed, Moore stood by the window looking out. The afternoon rain had stopped, the sunset glow dyeing the wet road surface red. He sighed, saying to Dempsey, "Everything is leading us in the same direction, and I have a feeling that place is more than just a church." On the third morning since Danny Keaton disappeared, Nashville began to feel the atmosphere of a real search. The morning newspapers had already printed a small headline on page 2, "Nashville's Voice Mysteriously Missing." Meanwhile, at Davidson County Police Headquarters, Lieutenant Harold Moore was assigned to lead the expanded search operation. He stared at the large map spread on the wall, red pins marking each area around Green Hills. "We'll sweep the entire route from here to St. Brigid's Church and extend it all the way to the Cumberland Bank," Moore said, his voice hoarse from 2 sleepless nights. Right from early morning, the once quiet small neighborhood suddenly became a bustling scene. Police cars lined up along both sides of the road, yellow lights flashing, reflecting on the damp roofs. City police helicopters hovered in the sky, sweeping spotlights down on the sparse forests. On the ground, search groups were divided into teams, one team heading north along Franklin Pike Road, the other advancing east, where the Cumberland River wound around tall reed banks. The smell of mud and rotting leaves wafted up from the ground, mixed with lingering water vapor after the rain. Working dogs were released from specialized trucks, barking loudly when catching old human scents on the grass. Moore led the second group, his shoes muddied with red soil. He walked slowly, eyes constantly scanning around as if he might catch some sign. A handkerchief, a piece of paper, anything left of the missing man. At the Cumberland River bank, the third search group launched rubber boats into the water. The river's surface was calm, herons standing still on sandbars. They probed along the water's edge with iron poles, observing everything floating by. One of the divers spoke up, "The current here is quite strong. If anything fell in, it could be far away by now." Moore nodded slightly, but his eyes still followed the dark water surface as if it swallowed every answer. On the second day of the operation, the search radius was expanded. Police and volunteers began going deep into the forest behind St. Brigid's Chapel, where the working dog had stopped 2 days earlier. The forest was damp, dark, and eerily silent. Warning tapes were strung around, flashlights flickering through each tree trunk. They found many old tire tracks, deep tire grooves in the soil, but not recent enough to determine the time. Hesitance. In the clearing next to the church's small cemetery, a young officer stopped, bending down to pick up a dark-colored fabric scrap. "Just a rotten cloth piece," Moore said after examining it. Don't hope too soon. Helicopters hovered overhead for hours, engine noise echoing into the forest, startling birds into flight. At the temporary coordination center, set up right at Green Hills, topographic maps covered the tables. Each search area was marked with a 3-mile radius circle, small X marks, noting where dogs barked or where red soil appeared. Moore held a pencil, drawing a line connecting from the Keaton house to St. Brigid's, then out to the riverbank. This is the possible movement axis, he said, and also the path out of everyone's sight. On the fourth day, the weather turned sweltering. Rising temperatures caused the mud to dry and crack, the musty smells becoming more pronounced. Local police, rescue teams, and a group of resident volunteers continued combing every road segment, every rock crevice, every grass patch. An elderly woman living near the church approached Moore, recounting that night she saw car headlights shining into her window, then suddenly going out. I thought the car stalled, she said, but in the morning the road was empty. Moore noted the detail, but nothing was certain yet. As dusk fell on the fifth day, the last team returned to the command center. They brought back a few items picked up: an empty beer bottle shell, a wet piece of wood, a few old electrical wires, none of value. Moore sat silently in the temporary tent, yellow light casting on his sun-tanned face. He removed his hat, wiped sweat, then looked at the photo of Danny Keaton placed in the middle of the table, the man with a gentle smile and expressive eyes, holding a wooden guitar. Next to it was the cowboy hat and broken guitar string piece found the day before, now dry. If this is all that's left, Moore said softly, then we're looking for a ghost. The night wind from the river blew in, carrying the smell of brackish water and wet grass scent. In the sky, the last helicopter turned away, its light sweeping one circle, then fading into the pitch-black void. 5 days of searching, dozens of miles of land combed, but no further trace of Danny Keaton appeared. Only overlapping red circles remained on the map, and a heavy emptiness enveloping the entire team. Moore stood up, saying to Dempsey as they extinguished the last cigarette of the night, "From now on, this is no longer a search. This is an investigation." After 5 days of searching with no results, Lieutenant Harold Moore understood it was time to shift direction. "If we don't find him out there," he said to the investigation team, "then the answers might lie in his own life." New orders were issued the next morning. Focus on Danny Keaton's personal relationships and work. RCA Studio B was the first stop. There, technicians were still sorting cables and unfinished tape reels. They recounted that on the night Keaton disappeared, he worked later than usual, seeming very stressed. He wasn't like himself, one technician said. Sat still for hours, then muttered to himself that, if this gets out, I'm done for. We thought he was talking about the album. Who knew? That account caught Moore's attention. He asked further about what this was, but no one knew. In the afternoon, Moore and Dempsey met Marty Lowell, Keaton's tour manager, at a small office near Broadway Boulevard. Marty was a man over 40, skinny build, glasses slipping down his nose, ashtray full of half-smoked butts. When hearing the police were reopening the investigation direction, he was silent for a moment, then said slowly, "Danny was a perfectionist, but lately he changed. He often mentioned St. Brigid's Church, run by Pastor Caleb Hart. He said something off in the charity fund they managed. He said he'd check the books, since he'd donated quite a bit to them." Moore nodded, asking again, "Do you know if Danny talked to anyone at the church?" "Only Pastor Hart. He was close to Danny, called him the Son of God in music." That information immediately opened a new direction. Moore ordered Dempsey to prepare a subpoena while contacting St. Brigid's Chapel, less than a mile from Green Hills. When the two arrived, Nashville's sky was already gray with afternoon. The church sat in a wide plot of land, red brick walls covered in moss, bells tolling heavily in the damp space. Inside, Pastor Caleb Hart, a man around 50, tall build, prematurely gray hair, was arranging teaching materials. He greeted them with a calm smile. "You're here about Danny's matter, right? I heard the news. It's heartbreaking." Moore stepped right into the question. "Were you the last person to talk to him?" Hart tilted his head slightly. "No, we only exchanged a few words on the phone a few days earlier." He complained of being tired. "On the night he disappeared, I was at home preparing for the morning service." Dempsey pulled out his notebook, asking again, "Did he mention anything about money or the church's charity fund?" Hart froze for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "We receive donations regularly. Mr. Keaton was generous. But everything is transparent." His voice was light, but his eyes couldn't hide the wary glint. Moore scanned the chapel. The stone floor was damp, a few cracks running along the walls, and at the far end was a wooden door leading down to the basement for storing instruments. He asked, "What's the basement used for?" Hart replied immediately, "Just a storage room, sealed off for many years. Nothing worth seeing." As the two officers left, the pastor's eyes followed them, his face amiable, but his hand gripping the cross pendant around his neck tightly. Back at headquarters, Moore sat at his desk, opening the financial file that the analysis team had just sent. The bolded line in the middle of the page made him frown. Keaton, Daniel, withdrew $10,000 cash from Union Trust Bank, July 9, 1970. 2 days before he disappeared. That money wasn't deposited into any other account, nor was there any trace of spending. Dempsey looked at the number and asked, "Maybe he took the money somewhere?" Moore shook his head. "No, he wasn't planning to leave Nashville. He was preparing for a tour. All plans were unfinished. This money could be the key." That night, Moore flipped through Marty Lowell's statement again. He said he'd checked the church's books. If Keaton discovered something wrong with St. Brigid's fund, this money could be evidence or leverage for confrontation. And if he went there on the night he disappeared, the only person who might know was Caleb Hart. That thought kept Moore tossing and turning all night. He looked at the map hanging on the wall, where the line from the Keaton house to St. Brigid's was still marked with a red circle. All the pieces were pointing to one spot. Early the next morning, before the sun could rise above the tree line, Moore drove back to the church area. The iron gate was still locked. Inside was a gravel yard, silent. He stepped out, peering through the rusted fence at the red brick building. A gust of wind blew through, carrying the long toll of a bell. An indescribable feeling crept into his chest. The feeling that longtime professionals still called police instinct. He knew he had no evidence yet, but something in the air made him believe Danny Keaton had come here, and perhaps never left. The next morning, as the sun just rose above the eastern tree line, the Davidson County Police Forensics team arrived at the house on Maple Drive Street. A yellow tape stretched across the front gate, specialized vehicles parked full along the driveway. Lieutenant Harold Moore stood on the porch, watching the technicians in white protective suits move around the living room, where everything was still kept as it was from the night Danny Keaton disappeared. The space inside the house was eerily quiet. Keaton's guitar still leaned casually against the chair, the third string broken from before, now twisted on the floor. The handwritten sheet music lay unfinished on the coffee table, the last line half-written "Love me like," then crossed out. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no skid marks or breaks. Everything indicated one thing: Danny didn't leave the house in panic. The forensics staff photographed every angle with Polaroids, from the desk position, the staircase steps, to the back door frame. In the bedroom, they found a soaked leather jacket draped over a chair, the hem caked with dark red mud. When the soil sample from that was compared to the backyard soil, the results were distinctly different. This mud had high clay content, mineral composition entirely unlike the Green Hills area soil. A technician muttered, "This type of soil is only found in the southern area, around the old church." Moore overheard, his eyes darkening slightly. The second floor of the house was neat as if just cleaned. In the closet, every outfit was still there. The suitcase was neatly placed, nothing missing. On the desk was a small notebook, Keaton's scrawled handwriting, "Meet CH. Check receipts, before Sunday. CH, Caleb Hart." Moore flipped to the next page, the last line written in pencil, smudged. "If it's what I think," the sentence unfinished. Dempsey went around the kitchen, opening every cabinet. He noticed 2 wine glasses on the sink, one with a faint red lipstick mark. Evelyn said only 2 people in the house, he reminded. Maybe she drank with him. Moore looked at the glass, nodded slightly, then signaled to take it for fingerprint testing. He wasn't rushing to conclusion. His seasoned intuition told him that the most ordinary things were sometimes the most important leads. The forensics team continued collecting every possible trace. A crumpled scrap of paper with a phone number in the trash bin, a few small gravel bits stuck to the entry rug, and especially the speckled mud stains on the wooden floor near the front door. All were photographed, numbered, and put into sealed bags. In the dim morning light of Nashville, the Polaroid camera flashed continuously, each white image gradually turning to the pale brown of old wood. When checking the garage, they discovered the silver Impala still hadn't returned. Old tire tracks from before the rain made analysis pointless, but one detail made Moore pause on the wall rack. There was an empty spot, where Danny usually hung his car keys. They were gone. No one knew if he took them or someone else did. Moore sat down in the living room chair, looking around the house once more. He sighed, saying to Dempsey, "No signs of force, no struggle." He left calmly. Maybe someone called him out? Possibly. Or lured. His eyes stopped at the landline phone by the window. The line was still active, but the call log showed no outgoing calls after 10 p.m. The last incoming call was at 9:58, lasting less than 2 minutes, caller unknown. Moore requested tracing that number through the switchboard, a step he knew would take time, but necessary. As the technicians packed up their equipment, Moore walked down the hallway, pausing by the family photo frame on the staircase. In the photo, Danny held a guitar, standing next to Evelyn and the 2 stepchildren. Everyone was smiling, autumn sunlight shining on their faces, an image that seemed happy, now overshadowed by suspicion. In the afternoon, sunlight pierced through the treetops, casting down on the porch. Moore and Dempsey left the house, leaving the forensics team to continue packing. "What do you think?" Dempsey asked. Moore looked down the road leading south, where mud still bore shoe prints. "I think," he replied slowly, "he was pulled out of here by someone willingly or not, and that person knew he wouldn't resist." The forensics van left, carrying the evidence bags, leaving the house silent in the afternoon light. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze. On the table, Danny's notebook lay open, the unfinished line like a warning. In Moore's mind, the pieces began to connect. The broken guitar string, the wet hat, the red mud stains, and the TH initials, all pointing to the same name. As night fell, Moore drove past the road leading to St. Brigid's Chapel. The church loomed faintly through the thin fog, wet roof tiles dark. He pulled over to the roadside, looking at the dark bell tower standing out against the gray-purple sky. The feeling in him was clearer than ever. Danny Keaton didn't run away. He was brought here, and perhaps everything ended right at this place. 3 months later, Nashville had stopped mentioning Danny Keaton's name. The newspapers that once covered the disappearance gradually gave way to election season news, and in the bars along Music Row, his voice still played from old jukeboxes, but now only like a sad memory, no one still waiting for that singer to return. Davidson County Police Department Headquarters, Fall 1970. In the small room smelling of old paper and cigarettes, Lieutenant Harold Moore sat silently before the thick stack of Keaton case files. He flipped through each report page, reviewing everything they had, conflicting statements from the wife and stepchildren, unidentified red soil sample, guitar string piece, cowboy hat, and the unfinished note with CH. Everything still stopped there. No body, no witnesses, no incriminating evidence. The forensics lab found no new traces, and the bank confirmed no other transactions related to the $10,000 Keaton withdrew before disappearing. Moore had returned to St. Brigid's Church many times, each time only meeting Pastor Caleb Hart with an inexplicably calm demeanor. He engaged in conversation, talked about morals, prayed for our poor friend, but showed no fear whatsoever. The last time, when Moore suggested viewing the church basement, Hart just smiled lightly. The basement is musty, unused for a long time. If God wants you to find something, He'll show you. No need to go down there. That statement sent a chill down Moore's spine, but there was no legal basis to force him to open it. No search warrant, no concrete evidence, all just hunch, and hunch wasn't enough to write in the report. Early October, the prosecutor's office issued an official notice. The disappearance of Daniel Keaton was transferred to suspended investigation status until new evidence emerged. Moore read that line in the internal bulletin, feeling a familiar emptiness well up. 3 months of searching, dozens of personnel, hundreds of hours of combing and investigating, all ended with 2 words, dead end. He carefully packed the entire file, maps, Polaroid photos, and evidence bags into a cardboard box labeled Keaton Daniel, missing person. Before closing the lid, he paused, taking a ballpoint pen to add a line on the inside of the lid. Check church basement if reopened. Just a short sentence, like a reminder sent to someone, perhaps himself in the future, or any investigator who would reopen this file. When the box was sealed, Moore placed it on the wooden shelf in the storage room among hundreds of other files, names swallowed by time. He stood silently for a moment, looking at the dim light from the fluorescent bulb casting on the dusty shelves, then turned away. Outside, October wind blew through the oak trees, carrying the smell of earth and rain. A week later, he submitted the final report to his superiors, reading evenly, no further evidence. Keaton case filed under missing person, unsolved. As he left the room, he paused before Keaton's portrait photo in the file. The gentle smile and bright eyes, as if still looking at him from a very distant place. And so, the Daniel Keaton file was officially closed. No one mentioned the singer who once made Nashville tremble with his voice. Evelyn sold the Green Hills house and left the city. St. Brigid's Church still opened every Sunday, bells tolling steadily as if nothing had ever happened. And in the cold storage room of the police department, among hundreds of forgotten files, the box with case number #1970712 lay quietly on the shelf. Harold Moore didn't know that the scribbled line he wrote that day, "Check the church basement if the opportunity arises," would be the only thing left to open the door to this case 40 years later. From 1971, the name Daniel Keaton gradually faded from Nashville's memory, like a song cut off midway that no one remembered the melody anymore. The disappearance that once stirred the whole city now only remained a cardboard file box stacked silently in the Davidson County Police Department storage room. The box with a faded label and the scribbled line, "Check church basement if reopened." Throughout the 1970s, no one reopened it. Lieutenant Harold Moore was transferred, then retired to the suburbs of Clarksville. He still occasionally mentioned the Keaton case as a ghost that wouldn't leave, but the file stayed there, gathering dust. Nashville changed rapidly at that time. Skyscrapers rose, old studios were demolished, and St. Brigid's Chapel gradually deteriorated. The church still opened every Sunday. Pastor Caleb Hart still stood on the pulpit, his deep voice resounding amid the old organ music. No one still connected him to the long-ago disappearance. In the 1980s, American criminal investigation began talking about DNA concepts. Forensics magazines wrote that now, just a hair or a drop of blood could identify the perpetrator. But at that time, the Keaton evidence, guitar string, mud, jacket, were all dried and sealed by old methods, not up to standards for new technology testing. No one thought of reconstructing an old file amid thousands of piling cases. Nashville entered the modern country music era, and the Keaton case sank deep into the shadows of the storage hallway, where dim yellow lights only flickered when someone accidentally opened the door. In the 1990s, Pastor Caleb Hart passed away. The funeral was held right at St. Brigid's, crowded with mourners. The eulogy praised him as a man who lived his life for faith and community. No one knew that in the police file still lingered an old note with his name, like a smudged ink stain never erased. By the early 2000s, when the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation (TBI) established the Cold Case Unit, thousands of long-standing files were digitized. In the first list, Keaton, Daniel, missing person 1970 appeared among many others, ranked in the pending review when viable samples available group. Young technicians, while entering data, once chatted about the strange note on the box lid. Check the church basement if the opportunity arises. They laughed, thinking it was just an old police habit from the previous generation. Those who still believed in instinct more than evidence. But time continued to pass. No one reopened that box. Young officers passing by the long wooden shelves, rarely anyone stopped to read the faded lines carefully. The storage room was in the basement of the old headquarters, year-round musty smell, white light spilling from a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. If anyone entered, they only heard the steady hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of old paper in the darkness. On the other side of the city, St. Brigid's Chapel gradually became abandoned after the parish merger. Rotting wooden doors, rusted bell tower, sparrows nesting in the vents. No one remembered that beneath the cold stone floor, a secret might still be held, never revealed. In 2010, when Nashville officially launched the Reopen Legacy Files project, prioritizing disappearances with preserved evidence, the Keaton file appeared again in the review list. On the electronic report, it only took a few lines. Case hash 1970712, missing person, unresolved. Evidence status, preserved soil sample, guitar string clothing, recommended for DNA retest. No one knew why, among thousands of cases, that name was marked priority. Perhaps just because of Harold Moore's scribbled line from back then. Perhaps fate. And from there, 40 years after the rainy night in Green Hills, the dusty cardboard box with case number hash 1970712 would be opened for the first time. Inside, the yellowed Polaroid photos, broken guitar string and old red soil sample would begin to retell the story Nashville thought it had forgotten. April 2011, the TBI file storage basement in downtown Nashville echoed with the creak of hinges as the old iron door opened. Fluorescent lights shone down on hundreds of wooden shelves packed with dusty file boxes. Young investigator Alicia Ward, 32 years old, stepped in, holding a list of unsolved disappearances in the Reopen Legacy Files project. She had just been transferred to the Cold Case Unit, bringing meticulousness and the belief that every mystery could find an answer if someone bothered to listen to the story the files wanted to tell. She walked along the shelves, following the faded old labels: Andrews, 1969. Runaway, Watson, 1972. Suspicious death, Keaton, Daniel. Missing person, 1970. The last name made her stop. Alicia grew up in Nashville, had heard her mother mention the voice of the man who disappeared with his last song. She pulled the box off the shelf, blew the dust covering the lid, and saw Lieutenant Harold Moore's slanted handwriting, "Check church basement if reopened." Alicia opened the lid. Inside were the intact pieces of evidence: a broken guitar string piece, sealed bag containing the red soil sample, a few crime scene Polaroid photos, and especially an old reel-to-reel tape labeled July 11th 70, final take. Everything was sealed with yellowed paper tape, but untorn. In the accompanying report, Moore's last line read, "No body. Suspected lured from home, related to St. Brigid's Chapel." She placed each item on the table, eyes not leaving the tape reel. "A studio, an artist, a church," Alicia muttered. "And a message unread for 40 years. She knew that in 1970, DNA technology didn't exist, but this evidence, if preserved properly, could hold biological traces enough to extract. That afternoon, Alicia brought the file box to the Cold Case Unit office on the 3rd floor. The unit was small, just a few people handling hundreds of old cases, but everyone understood the value of each sample. When Alicia presented her discovery, her supervisor, Captain Mark Hensley, frowned. 40 years, you sure anything can be extracted from those samples? Alicia replied firmly, if the guitar string sample was stored in paper bags, and the soil bag still sealed, DNA can still be separated by trace methods. We've solved the 1968 case with just a hair. Hensley looked at her for a few seconds, then nodded. All right, file a request for re-examination. I want to see if the music really holds memories. The next day, the request for retesting Keaton case evidence 1970 document was sent up to the TBI board. In the submission, Alicia wrote, Daniel Keaton disappearance likely related to criminal offense. Evidence well preserved, high forensic value. Recommend DNA extraction and audio data reconstruction from the tape reel. A week later, the approval notice was signed. The Daniel Keaton file, #1970712 was officially transferred from unsolved to reinvestigation. The DNA lab in Knoxville was assigned to process the guitar string and soil bag samples. The TBI audio room took on reconstructing the tape reel. When she received the confirmation email, Alicia looked down at the table, where Moore's old box lay open, the faded Polaroid photos spread before her. In the photos, the Green Hills house appeared blurry, the forgotten guitar, dim light spilling through the curtains. She felt as if those pieces of evidence still breathed the story of an unfinished tale. That evening, Alicia left the office late. Outside, Nashville glowed with music echoing from the bars, just like the night Keaton disappeared 40 years before. She paused before the Tennessee Cold Case Unit nameplate, the light reflecting on the motto below. Time doesn't close the truth, she said softly to herself. All right, Danny, it's time to reopen your unfinished song. And so, after more than 40 years in the shadows, the dusty file box with case number #1970712 was placed back on the investigation table, beginning a new chapter in the case that all of Nashville once thought had fallen into eternal oblivion forever. At the TBI laboratory in Knoxville, Tennessee, the first morning of June 2011 began with a familiar ritual: disinfecting the table, checking gloves, opening the evidence seals. Inside the box shipped from Nashville were things that seemed inanimate: a broken guitar string, a red soil sample, an old audio tape reel, and a handwritten 1970 investigation report. The forensics team received the file with Lieutenant Harold Moore's final note: check church basement if reopened. The lead technician, Dr. Lorraine Gibbons, gently removed the paper-sealed guitar string bag from the yellowed adhesive tape. Inside was the thin metal strand, still clinging with tiny brown specks at the break. This is a rare find, she said to Alicia Ward, who was present to observe. Guitar metal holds hand sweat very well, sometimes even epithelial cells. If kept dry, DNA can still be extracted. The analysis steps began. Under the microscope, the string was washed clean with a special solution, then cut small and placed into the trace centrifuge. The process took hours, separating every microbial sample still adhering to the metal surface. When the PCR machine, the DNA amplifier, displayed the signal bands, Lorraine looked at the screen and said softly, "There are two different DNA strands." One was Daniel Keaton's, matching the old medical records Alicia had provided from the hospital file. The second, male DNA, unidentified, not belonging to Keaton. Alicia fell silent as she looked at the chart, displaying the two parallel gene bands on the screen. Over 40 years, this evidence had still preserved a trace of the person who was with Danny in his final moments. "Do you want me to run it through CODIS?" Lorraine asked. Alicia nodded. "Yes, it's like we're hearing the voice of the past again." It took nearly a week for the CODIS system national DNA database to complete the matching process. One morning, as Alicia was reviewing the report, the phone rang from the lab. Lorraine's voice came urgently over the speaker. "We have results. The second sample partially matches the DNA profile of Caleb Hart Jr., grandson of Pastor Caleb Hart." Alicia stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. That name had come back, like a circle closing after more than 40 years. She immediately cross-checked the Hart family file. Caleb Hart Sr. had died in 1992, but his son, Caleb Jr., still lived in the southern suburbs of Nashville. According to records, Hart Jr. had overseen the renovation of St. Brigid's Chapel in the late 1970s. Just a few years after Danny disappeared, the connection between the church, the Hart family, and Keaton's evidence was no longer a coincidence. Meanwhile, the TBI audio technicians began digitizing the tape reel found in the file box. The original 1/4-inch tape, outer case labeled RCA, July 11, 70, final take. After cleaning and treating for mold, they ran the tape through an old Revox restoration machine. Static noise crackled first, then the unfinished guitar melody, repeating chords, not yet complete. Then suddenly, at the 23rd minute, a strange sound interrupted the music. The sharp clang of metal hitting a hard surface, followed by heavy breathing, then a low, hoarse and slow voice reciting prayer lines. "Merciful Lord, forgive the weak, for its song has surpassed humility." The technicians fell silent. Alicia leaned in close, requesting to rewind the audio segment. Lorraine lowered the volume, then played it again. The echo filled the cold room, each word resounding clearly. After the prayer came a long silence, then the sound of something falling, the exact sound like the metal clang the neighbor witness had described on the night Keaton disappeared. The TBI acoustics team took the tape segment to voice analysis software. The results comparing tone samples, vibrations, and breathing rhythm showed a 96% match with Pastor Caleb Hart Sr. Voice. Extracted from archived 1969 Parish Library sermon recordings. Though not absolute legal evidence, the result made Alicia nearly certain someone from the church had been with Danny that night, and they might have recorded his final seconds. That evening, Alicia sat alone in her office, the light from the computer screen casting on the old photo of Keaton. She pieced it together, the unknown DNA sample, the prayer voice, the metal sound, the note, "Check church basement." Everything pointed to one place, St. Brigid's Chapel. She opened the electronic file, entering the first note since 1970, evidence update, DNA match, Hart family link. Audio file suggests presence of second male voice during final moments. Location, St. Brigid's Chapel. Then she saved it, hitting send on the report to her superiors. Outside, Nashville tonight was humid again, like that old night. In the silent room with only the soft hum of the computer, Alicia looked up at the wide-open file box and whispered as if speaking to the singer in the photo, "Now we have the voice of the one who was with you at the end, Danny, and I'll find out what he did to you." 3 weeks after the DNA analysis results were announced, Alicia Ward sat in the chilly TBI office, eyes still fixed on the old photo of St. Brigid's Chapel on the screen. That red brick building had been abandoned for over 10 years, windows boarded up, bell tower, dark with moss. She knew it was no longer a sacred place, but a void holding what Nashville had forgotten. She submitted a search warrant application to her superiors, attaching all forensic evidence, DNA sample matching the Hart lineage, audio results of the prayer voice, and Lieutenant Harold Moore's 1970 note. "Check church basement if opportunity arises." It was no longer a hunch, but a command of truth. 2 days later, Davidson County Court officially signed the warrant, allowing TBI and Nashville police to search the St. Brigid's Chapel grounds for evidence related to the criminal investigation of Daniel Keaton's disappearance. When the warrant was stamped, Alicia smiled faintly. After more than 40 years, the door had finally opened. On the morning of the operation, Nashville's sky was overcast with gray clouds. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and distant church bells tolling like echoes of a confession. The TBI convoy stopped at the rusted iron gate, where the St. Brigid's Chapel sign had nearly peeled off completely. Weeds overgrew the path, ivy wrapping the brick walls. Alicia and the technicians stepped out, carrying the GPR, ground-penetrating radar, device, along with cameras, lights, and evidence bags. Inside, the space reeked of must and mold. Light from broken windows illuminated dust motes in the air. The old altar was covered in a thin layer of ash, Bibles scattered on the floor. Alicia scanned around, then pointed to the far end of the church, where a heavy wooden door led down to the subfloor utility area. The original church blueprints she found in construction records showed the utility basement had been sealed in 1972, just 2 years after Keaton disappeared. "Start here," she said. 2 technicians set up the stand, running temporary power cords for the GPR. The device emitted a low hum, then the screen displayed steady blue wave bands with each scan step. The GPR moved slowly along the concrete floor, every meter recorded by GPS coordinates. After about 10 minutes, a technician froze. "Captain, there's something here." On the screen, an anomalous acoustic wave appeared clearly. An oval depression nearly 2 meters deep, right under the area near the south wall, by the pulpit steps. Alicia bent down to look, her heart pounding. "Void cavity," the technician said. "Not a pipe, not a utility recess, like filled-in earth." Alicia knelt, touching the icy cold concrete floor. The tile was darker than the rest, as if repoured later. She requested a small test drill at the edge of the area. When the bit touched the concrete layer, the smell of damp earth wafted up immediately. The technician used a sample tube to extract into a vial, sealing it carefully. Back at the mobile lab outside the church, the preliminary results silenced the group. The mineral composition and color of the soil sample matched the red soil stuck on Daniel Keaton's shoes collected in 1970. Not just similar, but from the same geological stratum, a soil type unique to southern Nashville, exactly where St. Brigid stood. Alicia gripped the report tightly in her hand. "No doubt anymore," she said softly. "Keaton was here, and maybe he never left." She ordered the entire void area marked off. The tech team set up tents, installing 24/7 surveillance cameras to preserve scene integrity. They weren't authorized to dig deep yet, but had enough basis to apply for an exhumation order. As everyone packed equipment, Alicia lingered on the old steps, looking down at the cracked concrete floor. Wind blew through the broken window, carrying the smell of rust and howling echoes in the empty space. She imagined hearing somewhere a distant guitar string, just a single chord, lingering then fading. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from knowing she stood on the boundary between the present and a secret buried for over 4 decades. That afternoon, as they left the church, Alicia looked back in the rearview mirror. Sunset dyed the dark brick wall red, making the place seem aflame. She said softly, "Harold Moore, you were right. The basement is the key." At TBI headquarters, she immediately submitted the preliminary examination report, concluding GPR scan results reveal an anomalous void cavity under the St. Brigid's Chapel utility floor. Soil sample extracted there matches red soil found on victim Daniel Keaton's shoes, 1970. High likelihood remains buried at this location. The report was sent to command that evening, and within 24 hours, Davidson County Court would approve the exhumation order, opening the next phase of the investigation, recovering the singer's body missing for 41 years. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Alicia Ward was at the TBI office with a stack of old financial files just transferred from the Nashville diocese. After discovering the void under St. Brigid's floor, she knew the next thing to find wasn't underground, but in the numbers, where people often left traces they thought no one would notice. In the freezing storage room, yellowed paper files lay mixed among dust and cobwebs. She rifled through ledgers crammed with donation entries from 1968, 1972. Mostly small amounts, dozens, hundreds of dollars from parishioners. But when she reached the July 1970 ledger, her eyes stopped at a line typed on an old typewriter, misaligned, donation, unknown donor, $10,000 cash, no signature, no donor name, just a short line. But right in the week, Keaton disappeared. Alicia photographed the page, her heart racing. $10,000 cash, exactly the amount Danny Keaton had withdrawn from the bank 2 days before vanishing. She searched further in the same file. And in the August 1970 expenditure section, there was a handwritten entry: construction expense, concrete material, $9,870, paid by Reverend Caleb Hart. Below was an attached invoice with a signature in blue ink, scrawled but legible: C. Hart. Alicia sat still, taking a deep breath. The story took shape. Keaton brought the money to the church, perhaps for confrontation or donation, and right after, the church used that exact amount to pour new concrete at the spot where they had just detected the void. She stepped out of the storage room, taking the files back to headquarters. On the road, Nashville was immersed in light rain, droplets pattering on the car windows. In her mind, the pieces connected: cash, concrete, sealed basement. No doubt anymore. Someone had bought silence with cement. That afternoon, Alicia found the next lead: the 1970 subcontractor list for St. Brigid's Church, listing a small construction company in South Nashville. The company had long dissolved, but she tracked down the former site supervisor, now over 70, living in a Franklin nursing home. His name was Raymond Ray Douglas. Alicia met him in the late afternoon. Ray greeted her in the common room, eyes still sharp, though his hair was snow white. When she mentioned St. Brigid's cell, he smiled wryly. "I thought no one remembered that job. Odd thing is, we poured the foundation at night. That almost never happened for a church." Alicia leaned in. "You said at night, sir?" Ray nodded. "Yes, around 2 a.m., mid-July. Father Hart said it had to be rushed. Afraid rain would ruin it. He paid cash, full 10 grand, right after we finished. No contract, no receipts. I thought it a bit strange, but who asks questions back then?" She showed him a copy of Hart's signed invoice. Ray examined it closely, smiling sadly. "That's his signature all right. I remember clear because he wrote 'God sees all' on the church wall when we were done. I thought it was preacher talk. Now it gives me chills." Alicia thanked him, leaving the nursing home in the golden dusk. On the way back, she called Captain Hensley. "We have financial evidence and a witness confirming Hart directly oversaw the nighttime pour, paid with cash, exactly matching Keaton's withdrawal. Every piece fits." On the other end, Hensley said gravely, "Do you think the one who brought the money and the one buried are the same person?" Alicia replied, "I don't think I know." That evening she spread all the evidence on the table: asterisk church financial ledger with donation unknown, $10,000. Asterisk concrete material invoice signed by Caleb Hart. Asterisk testimony from Ray Douglas about the midnight pour, cash payment. Asterisk GPR results showing void under the new floor. Asterisk and red soil sample matching soil on Keaton's shoes. The room fell silent. Only the rain tapping outside the window. She looked at the old photo of St. Brigid's, a place once filled with prayers, now a tomb hiding a sin. Near midnight, Alicia opened the electronic report, entering a new line in the case notes. Corroborating evidence indicates financial link between victims' missing funds and concrete reconstruction led by Reverend Caleb Hart, 1970. Nighttime construction confirmed by surviving worker suggest probable concealment of homicide within church premises. As she saved the file, she leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. What Moore had written in the old file box had become reality. He was right. The church basement was the key, and that key was unlocking layers of truth. Outside, lightning flashed on the horizon, reflecting on the TBI office windows. Alicia saw her silhouette flicker in the flash, small but steadfast. She said softly, almost like a promise, "Tomorrow I'll go back to the church, and this time we'll open that concrete layer." That Sunday morning, Nashville was immersed in light rain, thin mist covering the old houses around the Hillsborough area. The clock had just struck 8. And inside the small St. Brigid's chapel, Pastor Caleb Hart Jr., who had inherited the position his father left behind, was preparing to step onto the pulpit. The organ played slowly, parishioners filling the front rows, unaware that outside, 3 black TBI SUVs had quietly stopped on the gravel road leading to the gate. Investigator Alicia Ward stood under the porch, raincoat over her shoulders, holding an emergency arrest warrant signed by Davidson County Court, approved the night before. The charges stated clearly, second-degree murder and concealment of body. Daniel Keaton, missing victim since 1970. She looked at the silent red brick building before her. Wet roof tiles, stained glass reflecting the dim morning light. The air thick with damp and rotting wood. Everything here seemed unchanged since the night Danny disappeared. Into position, Alicia said quietly. Two other agents fanned out to the sides, one team at the main door, one circling to the back gate. When the clock hit 8:15, Alicia nodded. The church wooden door swung open, outside light flooding in. Inside, Pastor Hart was bowing his head in prayer. His voice rang steady, deep, carrying the familiar timbre Alicia had heard in the restored tape. May the Lord grant us light to guide us, and forgive the erring souls. When he looked up, his dark eyes flickered. Three agents advanced, soaked from the rain. Alicia stepped forward, voice clear and cold. Pastor Caleb Hart, by order of Davidson County Court, you are under arrest for murder and concealment of body in the 1970 Daniel Keaton case. Parishioners rose in clamor, some crying out, some stunned, as if disbelieving their ears. Hart stood still, hands on the open Bible. His face unchanged, only lips pressed tight. A moment of silence enveloped, only the pattering rain outside. Finally, he said slowly, "You're making a mistake. I didn't kill anyone. All sins were buried with the previous generation." Alicia didn't reply, pulling out the warrant and holding it before him. "But you're still standing on that very concrete, Pastor." Two officers advanced, reading the Miranda rights. As they placed the handcuffs on his wrists, a small notebook fell out from the black robe. Alicia bent down to pick it up, rainwater soaking the leather cover. She opened it, seeing lines of handwriting in black ink, slanted. "That voice will never rise again." She looked at the line, then at him. Hart still held his calm gaze, neither denying nor trembling. "He is at peace," he said softly. "Don't disturb the past anymore." As the TBI convoy left St. Brigid's Stas, dozens of local reporters were already present. News of the church search had spread from the night before, but no one expected the arrest of a pastor right in the middle of Sunday morning service. Cameras flashed non-stop, whispers drowning out the rain. "TBI confirms it's the 1970 case, right? Is Keaton's body right under the church floor? Did Hart admit anything?" Questions erupted from all sides, but Alicia only replied briefly in one sentence, "All information will be released after the investigation is complete. But today, we've caught the first person with answers." The news quickly spread across Nashville. TV stations interrupted midday programming to report TBI arrests Pastor Caleb Hart, heir to St. Brigid's Chapel, on charges related to the 1970 disappearance of singer Daniel Keaton. Online newspapers blared headlines in unison, 40-year ghost church becomes crime scene. Older folks in the city whispered about the night Keaton vanished. They had heard the argument, the car driving off into the rainy night, and now everything seemed to fit together. At TBI headquarters, Alicia watched the live footage on the screen. Outside, the news storm had erupted, but inside her, there was only emptiness. This wasn't a victory, but a step toward something worse. Because if they were right, Danny Keaton's body was still under that concrete slab. She looked down at the wet notebook, the line "That voice will never rise again," still bold. That phrase echoed in her mind, mingling with the man's low prayer voice who had been led away in cuffs. Outside, rain still fell on Nashville, droplets pattering on the old bricks of St. Brigid's Chapel. Amid the stunned city, people began to realize that the disappearance of a singer thought fated half a century ago was now not just a criminal case, but the first crack in the wall of faith for the entire community. The TBI interrogation room in downtown Nashville was cold and brightly lit to the point of glare. The metal table reflected the fluorescent lights, two chairs facing each other, behind it a one-way mirror. Caleb Hart Jr. sat straight-backed, hands clasped in front of him. He was still in his pastor's robe, soaked from the interrupted morning service. On his chest, the fabric still bore wrinkles where the handcuffs had just been removed. Across from him, Alicia Ward placed the thick file on the table, her gaze calm but resolute. "We'll begin," she said. Voice even, neither threatening nor soft. "You know why you're here." Hart nodded slightly, eyes half closed, lips pressed. He said nothing. Alicia turned on the recorder, pushing a small pair of headphones toward him. "I want you to hear something." She pressed play, the room filling with static noise, then off-key guitar, and after that the low hoarse prayer voice drawing out each word. "Merciful Lord, forgive the weak, for its song has surpassed humility." Hart opened his eyes, his gaze flickered, hands clenching. "Whose voice is this?" Alicia asked. He looked up, replying curtly. "My father's." "Your father?" "Yes. Caleb Hart Sr. He's been dead a long time." Alicia tilted her head, "But the DNA from the 1970 guitar string matches you, not your father. And the tape was found in Keaton's old file box, not from the church. How do you explain that?" Hart fell silent. A flicker of disorder appeared in his eyes. Alicia pulled from the file photos of the signed concrete invoice and the church fund ledger page, $10,000, unknown donor. She placed the two papers before him, speaking slowly. "This is your signature, confirming the church floor pour in July 1970. Did you know victim Keaton withdrew that exact amount 2 days before he disappeared?" He bowed his head, lips pursed, fingers tapping unconsciously on the table. In the one-way mirror, Captain Hensley watched, nodding slightly to the note-taker, shift to financial confrontation phase. Alicia leaned forward. "You say the money was from donations. So why no donor name, and why pour concrete at night? No contract invoices, no building permits? Did you know the workers testified you directly supervised until completion?" The air thickened. Hart took a slow breath, then looked straight at her. "Do you believe in redemption, Investigator Ward?" Alicia replied, "I believe in the truth." He smiled faintly, but the smile twisted. "Truth? It rarely saves anyone." She pushed the GPR scan photo to the center of the table. The image of the void under the church floor, faint outline deep, nearly 2 meters. "This is the area under St. Brigid's pulpit. GPR data shows a cavity and supplemental concrete pour. The soil sample there matches the soil on Keaton's shoes. You still want to say you know nothing?" A long silence stretched. Hart bowed his head, hands trembling slightly. Finally, he spoke slowly, each word dropping like to the floor. "He came to see me that night, to demand the money back. My father told me to talk to him instead, because he feared outsiders gossiping." Danny was angry. "He said he'd go public about my father misusing donation money. I tried to stop him. We struggled, and he fell. Hit his head on the stone steps. The noise the neighbors heard, that was it." Alicia said nothing, just noted quickly. And then, Hart looked up, eyes sunken, voice hoarse. "My father said he'd handle it. He said if no one found the body, God would forgive. We kept him in the utility room. That night my father had someone bring concrete. I helped him pour the floor. I was the one holding the light." A bead of sweat trickled down his temple, mingling with the hum of the air conditioner. Alicia asked further, voice controlled. "And the body?" Hart looked toward the mirror, as if speaking to himself. "Right under the pulpit. My father said the closest place to God is the safest place." I believed. For 40 years, I stood preaching on it every Sunday. I thought I was protecting the family name, but it turns out I was just standing on someone else's grave. Alicia closed her notebook, gaze steadfast. "Are you willing to point out the exact location for us to excavate?" Hart nodded slowly. "At the south wall corner, where the Virgin Mary statue is. Under there, about 2 meters deep." In the observation room, Hensley nodded firmly. An investigator immediately left to prepare an emergency exhumation order. Alicia stood, turned off the recorder, said curtly, "Thank you, Pastor Hart. You've just given us the chance to bring one man back to the light." As police led Hart out, he turned back, voice hoarse. "You know, I used to dream of him singing in the church," that voice echoing endlessly. Now, silence. Alicia watched him go, eyes cold but an indescribable feeling pricking inside, part pity, part anger. She knew that every confession, no matter how late, couldn't erase 40 years of lies. That evening, the exhumation order was signed by the court in under 2 hours. On the order form was printed, "Emergency exhumation, St. Brigid's Chapel, South Pulpit area. Objective, recover victim Daniel Keaton's remains." Alicia looked at the paper under the desk lamp. Rain started falling again, droplets tapping rhythm on the window glass. She said softly, almost a promise, "Tonight we'll bring you home, Danny." That night, the rain stopped completely. Nashville was unusually quiet, as if the whole city held its breath. On the road leading to St. Brigid's Chapel grounds, TBI specialized vehicles lined up, yellow lights flashing against the old brick walls. The emergency exhumation permit was signed just hours after Pastor Caleb Hart's confession, and now, at 2 a.m., the forensics team was ready to descend into the ground, untouched for 40 years. Alicia Ward donned protective gear, standing under the damp cold steps leading to the basement. The air thick with lime and musty dust. "Dig exactly at the coordinates Hart indicated," she instructed, voice low and hoarse from staying up all night. 2 forensics technicians placed halogen lights around the pulpit area, drilling the first cut lines into the concrete floor. The drill bit sound pierced sharply, echoing throughout the church, like an echo from the past. The concrete layer over 20 centimeters thick, hard and aged, clearly a supplemental pour. As the first fragments broke off, a damp vapor rose, the smell of red earth mixed with rust filling the air. Moore had once written in the file, "Check church basement if reopened." Now those words were being read aloud by the scene itself. After nearly an hour, the cutting reached a depth of over a meter, the metal detector giving a faint signal. A technician used a small trowel to scrape away layers of soil, careful enough that their breathing could be heard clearly. Then a silver gleam emerged under the light, an old wristwatch, dial shattered, but the back case intact, engraved. DK, 1965. Alicia bent down, looking at the inscription through rubber gloves, her hand trembling slightly. "Stop," she said, voice choked. "Mark the location. This is the first marker." The team worked in silence. Layers of soil were removed, until the shovel hit something solid but not stone. When the light shone in, they saw a long bone segment, stained deep brown with clay. "We have remains," the lead technician reported. They switched to brushes, gently sweeping the clinging mud. The bone structure emerged gradually, pelvis, rib cage, then skull tilted to one side. Remaining hair turned to thread-like strands. A gust of wind through the broken window pulled the cold, damp smell of the church, and in that moment, no one spoke. Alicia stepped closer, eyes fixed on the emerging body. "Take DNA samples from the femur and teeth," she ordered. 2 technicians nodded, working quickly and precisely. Each sample was sealed separately, labeled Subject, St. Brigid's Chapel, July 2011. In the corner of the room, the silver watch lay neatly in a second evidence bag. The light cast on it a faint gleam, the dim light of justice after 41 years buried. As the first rays of the new day began filtering through the broken window, the forensics team completed recovering the remains. Alicia stood looking at the now empty basement, where the broken concrete and red soil spread like old blood. She felt as if Danny Keaton was still somewhere around here, silent but present, his song echoing in memory, hazy and sad like the unfinished melody. 3 days later, the Knoxville DNA lab confirmed the results. The bone samples recovered from St. Brigid's matched Daniel Keaton's DNA completely, cross-referenced with his 1968 hospital medical records. No doubt left. The missing singer had been found, right under where people had prayed every Sunday for decades. When Alicia received the report, she stood still for a long time, eyes fixed on the bolded line. Positive DNA identification, Daniel Keaton, 38, male. In that moment, every effort, every sleepless night, every vague hunch of Lieutenant Harold Moore in 1970 converged to one point: the truth had finally been revealed. That same day, the TBI database updated the status for file hash 1970712, case status. Missing person homicide, solved. Alicia read the line, heart sinking. She felt no relief, only like closing a melody that had rung too long. In Nashville, the news broke that evening. Singer Daniel Keaton's body found under St. Brigid's chapel floor after 41 years missing. The city fell silent. Those who knew his music played old records again, and Keaton's hoarse voice echoed across Music Row for the first time since summer 1970. That night, Alicia drove past the church once more. Police lights were off, the excavation area covered in white tarps. She pulled over, rolled down the window, letting the night wind carry the smell of fresh earth mixed with damp wood. The bell tower loomed in the darkness, still, no prayer sounds, only silence. "We found you, Danny," she whispered. And now, Nashville won't sing the wrong final note of that story anymore. September 2011, just weeks after the DNA results confirmed, the body found under St. Brigid's chapel floor was Daniel Keaton. The Tennessee State Prosecutor's Office began the formal prosecution process. The large conference room on the 6th floor of Davidson County Court stayed lit through many nights. Over 300 pages of files spread across the table, interrogation transcripts, DNA results, financial invoices, restored audio tape copies, and excavation scene photos. On the red cover sheet, bolded type State of Tennessee versus Caleb Hart Jr., homicide and evidence tampering. Prosecutor Eleanor Price, assigned to lead the case, reviewed every detail with investigator Alicia Ward and Captain Hensley. "We have 3 pillars," she said, voice low and clear. 1. Victims and Hart's DNA in the evidence. 2. Financial proof Hart received $10,000 exactly in the week Keaton disappeared. 3. The confession and body location pointer. That chain must be seamless, no leaks. Alicia nodded. She understood that, from now on, any small error could shake the case they'd spent over 40 years rebuilding. The forensics tech team was called back to Nashville to review the chain of custody, ensuring no breaks from 1970 to now. They traced every code: red soil bag, guitar string, silver watch, DK 1965, audio tape reel, old Polaroid photos. Each evidence bag was unsealed, rephotographed, cross-checked with Lieutenant Harold Moore's sign-off log and the 2001 transfer to TBI. Every signature, date stamp matched. As the technician resealed the boxes, Alicia exhaled in relief. The chain was intact. "No broken links," she said. Moore would smile if he were alive. Meanwhile, experts prepared courtroom presentations. DNA specialist Lorraine Gibbons to explain the guitar string extraction process, matching results between Keaton and Hart. Forensics audio team to edit the final recording tape. Unfinished guitar part, low prayer voice and metal clash sound, to be played in court, with voice analysis charts, compared to Caleb Hart's Sir Bot, quote sample. Finance department, to present ledgers, contrasting church donations, concrete invoices, and Keaton's withdrawal transactions. Finally, Caleb Hart Jr. Quote, S own testimony, full recorded interrogation, where he admitted to burying Keaton under the pulpit. Prosecutor Price met privately with Alicia late in the office. Yellow lamplight cast on the walls, cold coffee smell lingering. "You did what the whole system forgot," she said. "But in court, the jury won't listen with their hearts. They listen with evidence. Make sure every piece fits perfectly." Alicia nodded, flipping the final report page. Inside her was half relief, half choke. Because the case wasn't just a chain of evidence, but a belated answer for a voice once buried. Late December, the court set trial date, January 10, 2012, at Davidson County Court. News spread quickly. Nashville media called it the trial of memories, residents gathering at the courthouse gates, carrying old Keaton photos like preparing for a memorial. St. Brigid's Church, once the crime scene, fully cordoned off, the old bell tower silent. That evening, leaving the office, Alicia paused before the conference room nameplate where they just finalized the file. She placed her hand on the plaque, saying softly, 41 years, Danny. Soon you'll hear the indictment for the one who buried your song. Outside, Nashville's winter lights blazed along Broadway, reflecting on her car windows as she drove away. The Daniel Keaton case, from missing now recorded in the state system with a new status line, case type, homicide, pending trial. For the first time since summer 1970, Nashville was no longer the city of a missing singer, but the place preparing to witness justice come to light. January 10, 2012, Davidson County Court was packed. The winter morning bitterly cold, breaths turning to white vapor in the air. Lines queued in the courthouse hallway, mostly reporters, former St. Brigid's parishioners, and longtime Daniel Keaton fans. They came not just for the verdict, but to witness the end of a case that had shrouded Nashville for 4 decades. Inside, light from the windows shone on the judge's bench. Caleb Hart Jr., now 63, sat at the defense table. He wore a gray shirt, much thinner, hair fully white. His eyes no longer cold as arrest day, but weary, sunken. Across, prosecutor Eleanor Price and the TBI investigator team, including Alicia Ward, arranged files and evidence on the presentation table. When Judge Robert Lyman banged the gavel to open the trial, the courtroom fell silent. Prosecutor Price stood up, her voice steady and clear. Your Honor, this is not just a murder case. This is a story about silence, the silence of a community, the silence of a church, and the silence of a man who chose to conceal sin rather than confess. Throughout the morning, the prosecution presented the full evidence step by step. They began with the DNA results from the broken guitar string, proving Keaton and Hart were present at the same time at the scene. Next was the restored audio tape, the unfinished guitar strums, the low hoarse prayer voice, and the metal clash sound, the audio that made the entire courtroom hold its breath when played. After that, copies of St. Brigid's financial ledgers were projected, the donation unknown entry for $10,000, matching the amount Keaton withdrew before disappearing. And finally, the testimony of Ray Douglas, the elderly construction worker, confirming Hart directly oversaw the nighttime concrete pour, paid in cash without invoices. Alicia Ward was called as an investigating witness. She recounted the process of reopening the file, from Harold Moore's note to the moment of discovering the void under the church floor. When Price asked, "Did you ever doubt for a moment that you were on the wrong track?" Alicia replied, "No, Your Honor. Every soil sample, every photo, every number led us back to one place, and there we found the truth." In the afternoon, it was the defense's turn. Hart's lawyer, James Croft, did not deny the evidence, but emphasized, alas, this was not premeditated murder. It was an unintended accident between 2 men in an argument. Mr. Hart, in fear and under his father's influence, chose the wrong path, concealment instead of confession. But for over 40 years, he has prayed for Keaton's soul. That is not cold-blooded crime, but a lifetime of torment. Judge Lyman nodded, signaling Hart to stand. The pastor bowed his head, hands clenched tight. His voice was hoarse. Your Honor, I seek no excuses. That night, I didn't want him dead. I just wanted everything to go quiet. But when my father said bury him under God's light, I believed silence was the path to atonement. For 40 years, every time I stepped onto the pulpit, I heard his guitar in my head again. I prayed for him, but also for my own forgiveness. Today, if Nashville needs a confession for peace, I offer it. The courtroom was deathly silent. A few parishioners bowed their heads, tears falling. Prosecutor Price closed her file, looking straight at the defendant. Forgiveness is God's domain. Justice is man's. At 3 p.m., the jury retired to deliberate. Nearly 2 hours later, they returned. The air was so heavy the sound of a pen dropping to the floor could be heard. As the court clerk read the verdict, each word rang out slowly. The jury finds defendant Caleb Hart Jr. guilty of manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter and tampering with evidence, criminal concealment of evidence. Hart closed his eyes. No reaction. Judge Lyman read the sentencing. Considering the defendant's advanced age and cooperation, the court sentences 10 years probation with special supervision. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to relinquish management of St. Brigid's Church to the diocese, ceasing all related activities. A collective sigh rose in the courtroom, not quite disappointment, but a sad relief. The Daniel Keaton case was officially closed after 41 years. Alicia sat still in the back row, watching Hart bow his head as he left the room, his small figure blending into the line of officers. Outside, Nashville's sunset cast a gray-gold light on the building. She heard a reporter murmur, "The case is closed, but the crack in this city's heart may never heal." Alicia stepped outside, cold wind blowing through the old stone corridor. She looked up at the sky, gray clouds drifting west. For a moment, she thought she heard Danny Keaton's voice echoing somewhere on the street, soft, distant, and warm like a farewell. After the early 2012 trial, Nashville was never the same. The city of music, of endless melodies on Broadway, suddenly weighed heavy with an unacceptable truth. The man who concealed the crime for 41 years was a once revered pastor. Major newspapers ran headlines in unison. "Man of God, keeper of silence." The St. Brigid's parishioner community fell into crisis, prayer services canceled. The old church sign removed in silence. City authorities quickly decided St. Brigid's Chapel would close permanently. The diocese agreed, and the land where Sunday prayers once took place was transferred to the city to build a small memorial for Daniel Keaton. The old concrete foundation was preserved as part of the monument, upon which a plaque was placed engraved with the lyrics of the last song he left unfinished. "Love me like," the words trailing off, "just like his life." On the day the project was announced, Nashville residents gathered around the old church. In the quiet afternoon, Alicia Ward stood behind the fence, silently watching the crane lift the rusted cross from the roof tiles. Beside her, a reporter asked softly, "Do you think justice is fully served?" Alicia only replied, "Justice isn't perfect, but at least, now the truth isn't buried under concrete anymore." A week later, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation announced the establishment of the Keaton Initiative, a fund to support cold case investigations across the state. The initiative was proposed by Alicia herself, aimed at reopening forgotten files like Keaton's, focusing on applying DNA technology and restoring old evidence. The fund's motto was etched in steel at the TBI entrance hall: "No song should end in silence." Across Nashville, the case's aftermath still wove into every conversation. Those who grew up with Keaton's music played old vinyl records again. Radio stations dedicated an entire evening each month to airing all his songs. In Green Hills, the house where he once lived was kept intact as a small studio by the new owner. A memorial corner with his wooden guitar and a photo of him smiling gently under yellow lamplight. In March 2012, the Nashville community held a candlelight vigil along the Cumberland River bank, the former final boundary in the 1970 search for him. Hundreds attended: artists, police, parishioners, and strangers. Candles arranged in the shape of a giant guitar reflected on the water surface. Alicia stood at the water's edge, holding a small candle, watching the light flicker in the wind. A young band played "I'll Be Home in the Morning," Keaton's first recording. A sad but gentle melody blending with the waves and night breeze. When the song ended, no one spoke. Only the bells from a distant church tolled steadily, ringing like a belated goodbye. People say that from that night on, when passing the Cumberland bank, if you listen very carefully, sometimes you can still hear a faint voice in the wind, hoarse, warm, and poignant, as if it never truly vanished. Alicia bowed her head to place her candle in the long line burning along the shore. In that trembling light, she whispered softly, "Now you can rest, Danny. Nashville has heard you." From afar, the city lights reflected on the river, mingling with hundreds of shimmering dots. And in that moment, perhaps everyone felt what the final commentary from WSM radio the next morning captured perfectly. After 41 years, Nashville has finally found the truth, and the song returns. In today's America, where public trust is constantly tested, the story of Danny Keaton reminds us of 3 practical lessons. First, truth requires both time and infrastructure. The case was only cracked when Alicia Ward persistently pieced together fragments, broken guitar string, red soil sample, tape reel with modern technology, TOTUS, tape digitization, GPR. Applied to life, when facing conflicts at work or home, don't rush to conclusions on gut feeling. Maintain the chain of custody for your own truth. Take notes, save emails, snapshot evidence, because tomorrow might be when you need to connect the dots. Second, transparency trumps authority. The donation unknown $10,000 and nighttime concrete pour show that power, even a pastor's, can slip from ethics. In America's multi-faith life, separate belief from verification. Loving a community doesn't mean exempting scrutiny. Third, courage to break silence. Nashville lived 41 years in comfortable quiet, until Sergeant Harold Moore's advice. Check church basement if reopened was acted on by Alicia. At work or in neighborhoods, if you smell hasty concrete, shady processes, off numbers, speak up through safe channels, hotline union ombuds. And finally, nurture community initiatives like the Keaton Initiative, turn memory into policy, turn the Cumberland Memorial into new standards, that no song should end in silence. Simple lesson: persevere, document, cross-check, and dare to ask, where's the basement? If you believe every truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually be found, please subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey of uncovering untold mysteries. Thank you for joining the story of Nashville 1970 cold case. See you in the next video, where justice and memory speak once more.